Well, hello again, and I've got this opportunity to speak to you. I hope that you actually see this program in the year that I'm celebrating my 75 years of ministry. It's quite unusual because not many people can actually celebrate 75 years particularly and keep going as I am. I think I've a busier program this year than for a long time. It's quite incredible. But I really want to look at one subject in the Old Testament which always intrigues me. And I'm reading in the Authorized Version from, it'll be chapters 13, 14, it might even look into 50. No, it's all contained within these chapters. And it's quite interesting because even before I realized I was going to speak on this, it's very heavily marked in ink. Because I sense that this that I'm going to talk about is extremely important. And you've got to start in the first verse of chapter 13. Now, we do know that this was a period of great miracles under Moses. The children of Israel saw probably more miracles under Moses than even under later such as Elijah and Elisha, because it was Moses that led the children of Israel out of captivity in Egypt. And he actually spent 40 years of his life doing this one job. Oh dear. I dread to think, I don't know that I would have certainly liked to have been in Moses' shoes because of what I'm going to be sharing with you as we go through today. But what's happened here is that the children of Israel have come out of Egypt and they're on their way to what is known as the Promised Land, which we now know as the land of Israel. But there were problems. The fact is that the whole journey from Egypt to Canaan really was basically 40 days. And that's with something like 2 million people and all their cattle. It certainly is something that one can hardly imagine. This was a massive migration. And so when they get near to the land of Canaan, in the first verse of chapter 13, the Lord spoke to Moses and said, "Send men to search the land of Canaan, which I will give the children of Israel. And from the 12 tribes, send a man, every one, a ruler." So in actual fact, the 12 spies were chosen because they were the leaders or rulers of the 12 tribes. So every part of Israel was represented in this. Now, I'm not going to go into the names. That is not so relevant to what I want to say. But in verse 17 of this chapter, Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said, "Go up this way to the south and go into the mountain and see the land." Obviously, you can see it better from the mountain, as I know full well. And check and see the people that are living there, whether they be strong or weak, few or many. And check what kind of land it is to see whether it's good or bad, what cities they've got, do they dwell in cities or in tents, and In other words, they were basically told that they had to make a very thorough investigation to see what kind of people were there, weak or strong, to see how they lived, and to check on what kind of a land it was. Right. So it was actually the time of harvest, it says here in verse 20. So, verse 21, they obeyed and they went up and searched the land from the wilderness and ascended by the south, came to Hebron, and then they came down into the brook Eshcol, cut down from a branch of the vine with a bunch of grapes, and they carried it between two poles, and they brought pomegranates and figs. Now, in verse 25, they returned from searching the land after 40 days. Now, that was quite an extensive time, but presumably they were traveling either on foot or with donkeys or something. That's the only way they could have traveled. But they saw the whole land. And this is what they said. It says in verse 25, this is still chapter 13, they returned from searching of the land. And they came to Moses, to Aaron, and to the congregation of the children of Israel, in other words, to the representatives of Israel, and brought back word and explained to the whole congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. By the time you come to verse 27, what they said was, we came to the land that you sent us to, and surely it's exactly as promised. It flows with milk and honey, and these are some of the fruits. So what they're saying is, the first report is, yes, it's a beautiful land, there's plenty of fruit, it's a very fertile land, as we still know to this day. So that part of the report was good. But then when you come to verse 28, the people, they said, the people that are living there are very powerful. Their cities are walled and big. And we saw the children of Anak there. Now, the children of Anak actually are the giants. And it's quite interesting. This is a completely separate subject in itself, which intrigues me, and I can't deal with it now. Maybe I'll deal with it later, because this story of the giants is quite something. It's very, very interesting. Anyway, so they saw the children of the giants. They also saw the Amalekites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, and so on. So they saw all the people, right from the mountain to the sea and to the coast of Jordan. That's the River Jordan. Now, the first person to speak was Caleb in verse 30. And in front of Moses and all the people, Caleb was very strong. This is verse 30. Let us go up at once and possess it, for we're well able to overcome it. But in verse 31, 10 of the men said, we're not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are. And they brought up an evil report of the land that they'd searched. It's a land that got giants, as they said. So it's very interesting that at this point, the main report is from Caleb, and we know also he was supported by Joshua. He and Joshua were agreed. And they said, yes, whatever the difficulties, we can go up. but the 10 said, it's impossible. The task is too big. We can't do it. And in chapter 14, of course, the congregation wept. And then they turned against Moses and Aaron, really saying we'd been better to have died in Egypt or died in the wilderness. Why have we been brought here to this promised land only to fall by the sword so that we will die? It's better for us to return to Egypt. Now, we know the outcome of this story is ultimately that, and it's so sad, that the children of Israel had to wait 40 years from this point until they finally entered the land. And you know, I see this because, in a way, I liken the children of Israel to Christians and to the church. And I see us as typical, because the crossing of the Red Sea, when Moses led Israel into freedom through the Red Sea, to us, that's a symbol of the blood of Christ, that we come through the blood of Christ from sin into salvation. But we then have to travel through our lives in order to finally enter God's heavenly kingdom, the kingdom that Jesus was talking about so much, which is typified by Canaan. In fact, the final crossing into Canaan was through the Jordan. And usually, symbolically, the River Jordan is symbolizing death. That crossing the Jordan is when we die to pass into the kingdom. So there is so much symbolism. But the thing that disturbs me is that because of the lack of faith, the children of Israel could not enter the land for 40 years. And you know, this has always been a tremendous challenge to me in my life, because it seems that all my life I've faced challenges. But you see, if you look at the background of these people, they had, within the last 40 days, they had seen, well, just over 40 days, probably 50, they had seen the miracles, the 10 plagues. They'd seen the death of the firstborn in Egypt. They had escaped. They had seen the miracle of the crossing of the Red Sea, and it was a powerful miracle. I mean, the crossing of the Red Sea, because the Red Sea at the point where they crossed was not shallow, and it not only made a crossing point for them, but it destroyed the Egyptian army. So there were two miracles in that, which they had witnessed only a short time before. And yet, now, 10 of the leaders are saying, despite all those miracles which were so fresh in their memory, they said, we cannot go into this land. The people are in fortified cities. They are strong, and we are not strong enough to defeat them. I'm shocked, because they had to wait 40 years ultimately to enter into the promise which God had given them. And you know, all my life I've seen this as a challenge to do what other people see as impossible. It started even all those years ago when I was just 29 years old and faced with the challenge of attending this big conference in Jerusalem, which would be held for the first time in 2,000 years, a conference in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost in the upper room. Now, everybody said I couldn't do it. Oh, yes, if I had the money, I could buy an air ticket and I could go. I didn't have the money. You know the story. And I determined to drive there by car. But the thing is, everybody said it was impossible, even my own father. up until 3 weeks before I left, was praying for 2 years. My father was praying that God would stop me because I would die. Everybody expected me to die. I don't know what my poor wife thought. I didn't discuss that with her. I was just afraid that she might say no, and there's no way that I would accept no. But you see, my life started. That's what changed my whole life, as you know, because not only did I receive the blessing that I sought, and that's another issue on the day of Pentecost in 1961, May 1961, yes. But not only did I receive that, but that one journey was to change the whole of my life and open up the door that God needed for me. Because being on television, you know, if in England, if English people do anything stupid, they usually end up on television. And yes, I ended up on television, and there was a lot of publicity because I had done it. And the result was that other people wanted to go, and eventually I had to go back. And you know that I continued to go back. But that changed my life, because I was firstly going into Israel, but I was going behind the Iron Curtain. That opened up the whole Iron Curtain. And so what was eventually to become a travel company became the means by which I could, for all those years, for 12 years before I was arrested, smuggle the Bibles and so on, and begin a ministry which has lasted for 60 years. Because out of my 75 years, 60 years have been spent working in the former Soviet Union, in the communist countries. And all of that came because I did something by faith. But you know, I've had to do this all the time. After I'd come out of the prison and was still working behind the Iron Curtain, I saw that there was need for an outpouring of the Holy Spirit. They needed to have what I had received. And so I determined in 1988 to set up an East-West conference. At that time, we still had the Cold War. We still had what was called the Iron Curtains. And it was like an iron curtain separating us from all the countries in the Soviet Union, including, you know, the whole of Eastern Europe. It included the Baltic states, it included Poland and Hungary and Bulgaria and so on. And it literally was a barrier. But I had broken that barrier. And the whole of my life has been based on breaking barriers and doing the impossible. And that's where the blessing has come in my life, by simply doing the impossible. And when, during the 1980s, I got this vision of seeing this great revival, which I had experienced personally, flowing behind the Iron Curtain, it was impossible. And when I shared my vision with the church leaders, particularly in Germany, and told them what the vision was, they laughed at me. They said, "It's impossible. How can you bring these people from the East into Western Germany for a conference? And in any case, who are you?" They actually said to me, "Who are you? You're just a boy on your own." All right, I was a bit older than that, but they laughed at me and said, "You can't do it. We're the only ones that could do it." But they had no vision. They never did attempt it. I did it. And the miracle is that it took me more than 2 years to plan. But by 1988, with still the Cold War and still the Iron Curtain, I brought 4,000 people into that East-West conference in Germany. And that, it was a miracle, because it was foreseeing and prophesying the breaking of the Iron Curtain, and literally the revival fire that we saw there was to spread and flood right across and bring revival to all the countries of the former Soviet Union. Why? Because I did what was impossible. I can remember the time, even before that, in those early years, when I saw the possibilities, and I was preaching in Bulgaria, and Bulgaria was one of the last countries to break free from the Soviet Union. In fact, I mean, nobody understands this, but Bulgaria was always known as Little Russia. They were closer to Russia than the other countries, largely because Russia had helped to defeat the Turks in Bulgaria. That was the relationship. So they were the hardest country. And that was one of the countries, of course, I'd had to go through in 1961. But I can remember preaching there and seeing the power of God and just getting that vision. Look, we've got to get out of the church. We've got to reach these people. We have to take the football stadium. And everybody laughed at me. You can't. And I never forget going to the directors of the stadium and saying, look, I want to rent this to preach the gospel. They said, you can't. The stadium belongs to the Communist Party, and we are members of the Communist Party. We cannot rent. But I would not take no for an answer. I simply said, oh God, change these men. You have the power to break them and open it. And you know, the miracle was that eventually they said, no, we can't rent it to you, but we can give it to you completely free of charge. Can you imagine when I'm confronted with the communists who say this belongs to the Communist Party, you can't do it use it for religious evangelism, yet in the end, I got it completely without any restrictions for 4 days. You see, the whole of my life has been based on this, that it's going by faith. And, oh, yes, if I come back into Numbers, because Joshua and Caleb, they were so upset, and they spoke to all of Israel and said, look, it's an exceeding good land. This is chapter 14, verse 8, that if the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give us the victory. Don't rebel against the Lord, and don't be afraid of the enemy, because he said they're like bread for us. Their defense won't cover them, and the Lord is with us. But the whole congregation stoned Joshua and Caleb. And in verse 11, the Lord said unto Moses, how long will this people provoke me? How long will it be before they believe me? Because of all the signs which I've already shown. You know, God was so upset, saying, how long will these people resist me, provoke me, when they've already seen the miracles of the past? And you know, the whole church has come back to the miracles. And God is upset with the church when the church doesn't see the power that God has, unlimited power. And the whole of my life has been based on using all the unexplored power of God to do the impossible. You have to read my book. You have to meet with me. You have to listen to me. My whole life has been based on the fact that God is a God of miracles. Nothing is impossible. You have to go by faith. And in the end, the challenge was, God said to Moses, how long? I will smite them. I will destroy them. I will give the blessing to you. And in verse 13, Moses said, if you do that, the Egyptians will hear, because the Egyptians saw the miracles. They were part of the miracles, the crossing of the Red Sea. And if you do this to them, then they will say that you didn't have the power. Oh, what a challenge. But they still resisted. And as you know, unfortunately, As a result of this, God did have to punish them. Although in chapter 14, verse 19, Moses is saying, "Pardon, I beseech you, the iniquity of this people, according to the greatness of your mercy, even as you have forgiven this people from Egypt to now." And in verse 20, the Lord said, "I have pardoned." And in verse 21, "As truly as I live, all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord." Why? Only when the unbelieving world sees the power of God. And this to me has been the challenge, that even as I live, I want the whole world to see the glory of the Lord filling the earth and experiencing in his power. Look, live by faith, and I'll talk more about this later. If only you could believe what God says, he will fulfill every promise. God bless you.
This autumn, David will be ministering in Kazakhstan, Ukraine, and Uzbekistan. First, he will challenge and inspire attendees of the All Central Asia Youth Conference. This conference is key to bring revival and the power of God into the whole of Central Asia through young people who are already on fire to evangelize but need to receive a greater boldness. Jesus said, "We will do the same works that he did, and greater." Because of your generosity, David has held ministry in Poland, Georgia, and Armenia. And we have further events planned throughout 2024 and into 2025. Your support also enables us to supply much-needed humanitarian aid to those living in Ukraine. To make a donation, visit eurovision.org.uk/donation. 75 years in ministry is not just a milestone, it's a testament to the power of faith and perseverance. Throughout David Hathaway's ministry, from his early beginnings as a pastor in Dorking, Surrey, to the challenges of smuggling Bibles into communist Eastern Europe, through to the present day, holding days of prayer in war-torn Ukraine, David has witnessed the transformative power of Christ in the hearts of countless individuals. In Russia, he's seen hope rise from despair, and in Central Asia, the light of the gospel breaking through the darkness. Each encounter, each story, has reinforced his belief that the gospel message transcends borders and cultures, for it is the power of God unto salvation to those who believe. This anniversary is not just a reflection of his past, it's a call to evangelize, to inspire faith, and to ignite a passion for the gospel in every corner of the world. Together, let us embrace the Great Commission, for the best is yet to come.